This is your English listening practice podcast to help you learn and improve naturally. Listen to this for a second. John, say something in English, but make it sound like how you talk to your friends.
Alright. What do you think about the new movie? Heard it's pretty good, but I ain't seen it yet.
Did you catch all of that? If not, don't worry. You're not alone. A lot of learners tell us they can understand some native speakers. But when it comes to real-life conversations, it's like, what language is this?
It's not just you. Native speakers like me. We talk fast, we mix words together, and sometimes it sounds like a whole different language. But here's the thing. It's not impossible to understand us. You just need to know what to listen for.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm Emily, by the way.
And I'm John. This is Quick English Fix, the place where you can learn English while you relax, lie down, or even while you sleep. No pressure, no stress, just natural English and interesting topics.
Today, we're breaking down why native speakers can be so hard to understand. Don't worry though, we're not going to throw a bunch of boring rules at you or make it complicated. We'll keep it simple, fun, and something you can start using right away.
Stick with us and let's get started.
So let's start with one of the biggest reasons learners find native speakers hard to understand. We talk fast. And not just fast, we also get pretty casual with how we say things.
Like, we don't always say every word clearly. Sometimes we mash words together or skip sounds altogether. It's not that we're trying to be confusing. It's just how we naturally talk.
Right. And this can be really tricky for learners, because it's not what you hear in textbooks or classrooms. For example, instead of saying, "What are you doing?" we might say, "What are you doing?" Or even just, "What you doing?"
And if you're not used to hearing that, it can sound like a completely different phrase. Another example is, I don't know. I probably say, I don't know. It's faster, and it just rolls off the tongue.
That's what I mean. And it's not just about speed. It's about how we change the sounds of words to make them flow better. Like, "Do you want to go?" becomes, "Do you want to go?" Or even, "You want to go?" if I'm feeling really lazy.
And this happens all the time in casual conversations. It's not wrong. It's just how native speakers naturally talk. But for learners, it can feel like we're speaking a whole different language. That's why it's so important to train your ear to catch these changes. Instead of listening for every single word, try to listen for chunks of words or phrases. For example, if you hear, "What are you doing?" try to break it down in your head. What are you doing?
And once you start recognizing those patterns, it gets easier. It's like your brain starts to fill in the gaps. You don't have to catch every single word, just the main idea. Now let's move on to another big reason learners struggle with native speakers. The difference between classroom English and real-world English. Classroom English is great for learning the basics, but real-life English, well, it's a whole different story.
In class, you learn how to say things perfectly, but in real life, no one talks like that. It's more casual, more messy, and way more fun. For example, in a classroom, you might learn to say, "Please fill out this form." But in real life, I'd probably say, "Can you fill this out real quick?" Or even just, "Hey, fill this out." It's faster and it sounds more natural.
Right. And that's just one example. In classrooms, you learn phrases like "open your book" or "please do your homework." But how often do you hear those in everyday conversations?
Almost never, unless you're like a teacher or something. But even then, it's not the same. Real-world English is full of slang, phrasal verbs, and informal expressions that you don't usually learn in class.
And that's why it can feel so confusing when you step outside the classroom. You've learned one way of speaking, but native speakers use a completely different style. But it's not that classroom English is bad. It's super important for learning the basics. But if you want to understand native speakers, you need to expose yourself to real-world English.
Next reason, accents. Native English speakers don't all sound the same. We have different accents depending on where we're from, like American versus British versus Australian. Even within those countries, there are so many different accents. Like in the US, someone from Texas sounds totally different from someone in New York.
Exactly. And if you're not used to hearing those differences, it can feel like you're listening to a completely different language. For example, in the southern US, people might say y'all instead of you all.
Or in the UK, They might say cheers instead of thank you. It's the same language, but the words and the way they're pronounced can be really different.
That's why accents can be so tricky for learners. You might be used to hearing one type of English, and then suddenly, you're faced with a completely different accent, and it throws you off.
But you don't have to understand every accent right away. It's okay to start with one or two that you're most interested in and go from there. If you're into American TV shows, maybe start with an American accent. If you love British movies, focus on that.
Okay, let's talk about something else that can make native speakers really hard to understand. Slang and informal expressions. These are words and phrases you won't find in most textbooks, but they're everywhere in real-life conversations.
Slang is the secret code of native speakers. It's how we make our language more fun, more casual, and sometimes more confusing for learners.
For example, if someone says, "I can't even," what do you think they mean?
It's like they're so overwhelmed or surprised that they can't finish the sentence. It's kind of dramatic, but people say it all the time.
Right. And then there's something like "that's lit," which means something is really exciting or amazing. Like if you go to a great party, you might say that was lit.
What about this one? She ghosted me. That's a phrase a lot of learners might not know. It means when someone just stops replying to your messages or calls, they disappear like a ghost. It's not a great feeling, but it happens.
And these are just a few examples. Slang is everywhere, especially in casual conversations with younger speakers. It's a big part of how we communicate, but it can be really confusing if you're not used to it.
But here's the good news. You don't have to learn every single slang word to understand native speakers. Just focus on the ones you hear most often and you'll start to pick up on the patterns.
So we've talked about why native speakers can be hard to understand. Now let's talk about what you can do to improve.
Well, the first step, listen to real-world English as much as possible. Watch TV shows, movies, or YouTube channels with subtitles. And of course, listen to podcasts like this one.
Train your ear to catch patterns. Like try to really pay attention to how people talk, the way they combine words, the slang they use, the rhythm of their speech.
Try shadowing too. We've talked about it a lot. That's when you listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say, trying to match their pronunciation and rhythm. It's a great way to practice.
Another thing to focus on is phrasal verbs and slang. These are huge in real-world English, and they can really trip you up if you're not familiar with them. If you hear a new word or phrase, write it down and try to figure out what it means. You can even keep a slang journal to track what you've learned.
You can also join conversations, find language exchange partners, or join online communities where you can practice speaking with native speakers.
So, to sum it up, listen to real-world English, practice shadowing, learn phrasal verbs and slang, and join conversations. These are all practical steps you can start using right away. But I just want to add something. Do you have to sound exactly like a native speaker? Well, sounding like one is great. It's a sign of how far you've come. But here's the thing. It's also okay to sound like yourself, especially at first.
That's right. Everyone has their own way of speaking, and that's what makes us unique. Even in the UK, for example, people have different accents and styles. One person might sound totally different from another, even if they're from the same place.
So, while sounding like a native speaker is an amazing goal, don't feel down if you're not there yet. It takes time, practice, and a lot of patience. The most important thing is to keep going and enjoy the process.
And remember, your accent and your way of speaking are part of what makes you. So embrace it while you're learning. You're doing great just by trying.
We hope this episode helped you feel more confident about understanding native speakers. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, let us know. Thanks for listening, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Time to go over some new words and phrases before we finish. Breakdown, meaning to explain something in a simple and clear way. Example, let me break down this grammar rule so it's easier to understand. Wonder, meaning to think about something and be curious about it. Example, I wonder why some words are harder to pronounce than others. Casual, meaning relaxed, informal, or not too serious. Example, this is just a casual conversation, so don't worry about making mistakes. Mash, meaning to mix or press things together. Example, some English words mash together when people speak quickly. Rolls off the tongue, meaning easy to say or pronounce. Example, his name just rolls off the tongue. It's really smooth to say. Messy, meaning not neat or organized. Example, my notes are so messy. I can't find what I wrote yesterday. Throw you off, meaning to confuse or distract you. Example, the different accents can throw you off at first, but you'll get used to them. Keep practicing, and these words will start to roll off your tongue naturally. Thanks for listening. If you want more English listening and speaking practice, subscribe for more podcast episodes to improve your fluency with natural, real-life conversations.